Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ACHE Career Development Webinar, the first career development webinar of 2025. We are excited to get started with our partners at CashmanKlein. We're just going to wait for a couple more folks to start jumping on as we start to see those numbers trickle upward. We will get started in the next couple of minutes. See a couple of folks still coming in to the chat and into the participants area. Just letting those of you know who might have just joined us, we are going to get started in the next few minutes. We're waiting for a couple of folks to make sure that everyone has the chance to log in. And at about 6:05, we will start with the program. Right, I think we're just about ready to get started. Thank you very much to those in our audience who have elected to join us. We're really excited to bring you this program, the first career development webinar of 2025 from the membership committee of the ACHE of New Jersey. Before we kick off, just a couple of announcements from our side. As an affiliate chapter of the American College of Healthcare Executives, we are able to make available 1.5 qualified credits toward FACHE advancement for those of you who take part in this webinar, and for those of you who stay throughout the webinar. You will be able to self-report your credits through ache.org under My ACHE in the My Education section. Please go there and fill out, as soon as you're done with this session, the name of the program and the American College of Healthcare Executives of New Jersey as the hosts of the program. We have a lot of exciting events coming up at the ACHE of New Jersey, which I want to make this audience aware of. Coming up on May 6th, we have the Women's Leadership event at the Jets training facility. So as a big Jets fan myself, that is always a particular treat, but it's also a terrific program, a good opportunity to highlight some of the terrific female leadership around New Jersey and an opportunity to learn directly from them. So that's going to be coming up on May 6th. We encourage you to check ACHE on LinkedIn and our website in order to find that and sign up for that. Spring Congress will be held at Bergen Newbridge Medical Center on June 3rd. So that was only just announced, and we want to make sure that you all continue to check our social media platforms, our website. Please look for announcements. We're very excited about that this year, and it's a terrific venue with a terrific group over at Bergen Newbridge. And then 1 week later, on Monday, June 9th, will be the second career development event of the year. The membership committee will be excited to present the brand refresh event on Monday, June 9th. Please look out for communications around that. It's going to be a great opportunity to have your resume reviewed by healthcare leaders from across the state. It'll be an opportunity to hear from ACHE NJ's own Melanie Balestro on how to polish your resume, how to polish your personal brand and your social media presence for this competitive job market, and a good chance to get an updated headshot complimentary with registration. So a really exciting event coming up, a really exciting series of events coming up, and we want to make sure you're all looking out for those on social media. All right, so with no further ado, I can tell you that my committee has been very excited for this for several months now. We've been very eager to team with CashmanKlein, and we're very excited about this partnership. And I think this is going to be a terrific webinar on organizational transformation and the methods by which you can determine your best partners for these kinds of efforts. Dan, Yaakov, I will turn it right over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael. So good evening, everyone. My name is Dan Cashman, and I'm here tonight with Yaakov Klein. So together, we are Cashman and Klein. And so CashmanKlein, we have just recently started to partner with ACHE of New Jersey. And as Michael said, we're super excited for it. We've been really impressed so far with how engaged everyone is in this work and together and learning and helping one another as a healthcare industry. And so we talked with Michael and the planning committee a couple of months back about some different options for webinars that we could talk to this audience about. And what we really zeroed in on was this topic here tonight: organizational transformation, identifying your best partners. Because Yaakov and I have a little bit of an interesting background that we'll get into in a moment, where we have operated in the healthcare environment for over 20 years on both the internal and external side of transformations. And so we thought that gave us a very specific lens, a very unique lens to talk about a challenge that many healthcare leaders are going to face. And so we thought it would be a little bit of a different topic to talk about here tonight. So we will jump into who we are. So we are CashmanKlein. So we're an organizational development firm whose mission is to help our clients achieve world-class performance through intentional leadership. Now, we really stress that term, intentional leadership, because some of the things that you'll see there below in terms of the offerings that we have: leadership training, executive coaching, change management, process improvement, team dynamics, org culture. It's a varied topics, varied services that we engage with organizations on. However, we think that the thread that is common to all of that is leadership, right? Whether you are sharpening your skills in how you lead your team or your organization, or whether you are designing systems and processes to best meet the needs of your patients and consumers, we believe all of that starts with leadership. It starts with a choice. It starts with taking a look at yourself and saying, how can I impact the behaviors of others? How can I build a system in which my teams can thrive and build a culture in which my teams can thrive? And here on the right, you'll see a mixture of organizations that we have worked with over the years, many of which are in the healthcare space. And it's an area that's near and dear to us. And we believe that a lot of the work that gets done in this space is very impactful, right? Because it impacts not just the organization, but it impacts patients and their families and communities. And so we truly enjoy engaging with healthcare organizations, big and small. So that's who we are as a company. Who are we as individuals? So that's me here on the left and Yaakov there on the right. And so my journey started in healthcare started a little over 20 years ago. I worked direct care for a number of years for an organization called the Young Adult Institute. Many people probably are familiar with it in the New York, New Jersey area. And I worked direct care with folks in a group home setting for about 6 or 7 years there before moving on to finding industrial organizational psychology as my passion, my background. And that's where I crossed paths with Yaakov here, was at the Master's for Industrial Organizational Psychology at Baruch College in New York City. So then went on to work internal for Bellevue Hospital and several other hospitals within the South Manhattan network for NJACHE. And then through that work there, we managed to do a whole service of offerings internally for organizational development. So employee engagement, coaching, et cetera. And then I eventually stumbled into Lean Six Sigma, and that's where my path has taken me for the last 15 years, is really focusing on process improvement and change management for organizations. And I went on to work down in Maryland for the University of Maryland Medical System, helping to run their performance improvement department for that system, and growing it from a small team at the hospital I was based to a team of 12 fully functioning quality data analytics and PI professionals. During that time, Yaakov and I were working through CashmanKlein as externals, and over the last several years, we have slowly transitioned our careers to doing this full-time as external consultants, and that is where we operate today. So Yaakov, you want to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Dan. Good evening, everyone. It's so great to be here. Similar to Dan, like he said, we met in the Baruch Master's Program many years ago. And then I actually followed Dan to be an organizational development specialist at Bellevue Hospital for H&H as well. While he went down to Baltimore, I actually went to Mount Sinai, and I'm sure there are some people here who are from Mount Sinai. And so you might be familiar with talent development and learning. I was, until a year ago, at the Mount Sinai Health System for 10 years, finishing as the assistant director of learning and development and training over there. Jill, Mount Sinai West, shout out, love it. I showed up right after Sinai had acquired Continuum Healthcare. And so I was part of that huge change and transition that was happening at the time. As Sinai, as for those of you that were there, Sinai was really installing their leadership and trying to install their culture into all these other hospitals. And then just for the day-to-day organizational development of the health system, leading the function for executive coaching, team dynamics, leadership development, all of that. And I was very fortunate to be there again. So we've had this balance of being internal, being those sort of consultants on the inside, helping process, working with policy, working with system, working with hospital leadership, executives, and administration from the inside. And we've had it also from the outside. And to pat ourselves a little on the back, Dan, I'd say that when I left Sinai and Dan left the University of Maryland's health system, they both subsequently signed on as clients. And so now we have Mount Sinai Health System doing work in the health system, and Dan's doing work in University of Maryland. Really cool doing that once we were there. And so what we want to focus on tonight is going to be really just to make sure that we have a handle on the unique perspective of the approach of making sure that when you are trying to make a change, thinking through a lot of different options. First of all, should you make a change? When is a good time to make a change? Should you use external people to make a change? Should you use external consultants? How do you know which person is the right person? So there's a lot of these different variables that come into effect. And in particular, what we want to focus on and the different topics that we're going to hit is we want to talk with you a bit. And so we'll have a poll and some questions for the chat around some of the current landscape and the change in healthcare, some of the challenges that you might be hitting for those of you that have, I'm sure, tried change. We're going to introduce the CashmanKlein consultant matrix. And so taking some of the variables that you know about your organization, putting them into the matrix, and it sort of gives you a pretty good answer of how you should proceed going forward, a couple of case studies, and then speaking about getting the largest ROI of your engagement. And then obviously we'll have time in the middle for Q&A. So we're going to start off with a poll. I'm going to launch a poll. And let me launch the poll right over here. There we go. So we're asking over here about what types of transformations in your organization are they currently embarking on? And so take us a minute or so. Why don't you select the answer that you would like? If it's not listed here, feel free to drop it in the chat. Dan, could you also answer the poll? Let me know if
Host and panelists cannot complete.
Oh, are you guys
It
seeing the
doesn't allow.
results after you select the answer? Michael or Caitlin?
I can tell you I am seeing the results, but I think that might be due to
Oh, because you're that. Okay, fine.
Poll worked for.
I think I'm going to end the poll and then I'm going to hopefully share results. So right now we have a whole bunch of people. 37 people so far have answered. I'll give it another minute. All right. It worked great for you. Excellent. All right. So I'm going to give it 10 more seconds and then close the poll and then share the results. Hopefully. Okay. So here we go. So the largest one, 56%, upskilling workforce and leadership development. That is the type of transformation that currently your organizations are going through. Right behind that was financial restructuring or margin improvement. I'm sure that is something that is really hitting a lot of people these days. Close thirds and fourths were patient experience, employee engagement. Yeah. You know, it's very interesting. One of the projects that you'll see in a lot of different hospitals and health systems is this idea of upskilling. And can we take our baseline level employee who, you know, whether or not they needed a bachelor's to get the job, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, if they have a college degree, whether it's required or not, but instead of trying to recruit people or just trying to find different people from the outside, but investing into the learning and development of the people who are there, all the research shows that that is one of the best ways to go is to invest, right? When you lose, I think the last piece of data that I heard, which was about a year ago, on the amount it costs to fill basically an empty spot when someone leaves. It's so depending on the position, but it's somewhere between, I think, $35,000 to $75,000 a position. So if someone actually leaves or gets fired, and that spot is now open, that is a very costly time. And that's not to speak of all of the work that's not getting done. It's not to speak of the time it's going to take to get someone and then train them up to the level that they're competent. So I'm going to stop sharing now. So that was the first poll. What we're also interested in is the challenges. So you could put either the number in the chat, or you could actually just put some of the words from each of these in the chat, 1 through 7. But we're curious, what are your biggest transformation challenges? So you identified some of the transformations that you're trying to take place. Here, instead of launching the poll, just going to ask you to put it into the chat if you can. And it's amazing the different types of challenges that people will have, but we think this is a pretty good list. These 7 is what usually, and feel free, like Dr. Nicole did, feel free to put in a couple. You're not limited to just one answer. So 3, balancing day-to-day, yep, and managing operational complexity. 1, 4. Yeah, it was really interesting. As you guys are answering this, we'll talk about an actual organization that Dan and I are in right now, and we're helping them with a massive change. And a couple of the things that you're identifying are one of the things that we hit early on. So first of all, just aligning leadership, number one. Really, it's one of those things where the executive or the executive sponsor or the person that has the idea believes that everyone's just on the same page with them. Oh yeah, of course, everyone thinks this way. Everyone knows it has to change. Everyone wants this change. And we're encountering more and more where you have one person who is sort of all gung-ho about the change, but they're a level right beneath them. So if it's a CEO and COO that are aligned, and then maybe they're VPs or senior executives, they're not as aligned in the common vision or really wanting to make the change at all. I'm seeing 7 pop up a lot, limited time, budget, or resources, of course, right? That's one of those things. We're going to talk about some of that a bit later when it's time to make a change, some of the variables that you should put into account. Number 3 is something that comes up a lot. How do you balance the day-to-day care with the transformation effort? You have to keep going, right? You have to keep providing care, and you have to change things. Those are not easy to juggle at the same time. And really one of those things that you have to have a really good plan for in advance, because that is often, just to give you a little bit of a preview, that's often one of the biggest resistors from the people who need to actually push the change through. You're going to turn down to the next level of leadership, be it your senior managers or your senior directors. So after you've gone through the C-level and the senior executives, and now we're at, senior directors, and they're saying, how do you expect me to get my job done on a day-to-day basis? How do you expect my team to do this when we're also adopting these new things? A very real and very legitimate challenge that people have. So now that we've sort of talked through some of the transformations that you think your organization or you would like your organization to go through, and we spoke through some of the challenges, let's talk about, why it helps having someone from the outside and someone that's an expert in transformation to be there. And this is one of our favorite quotes, W. Edwards Deming, about transformation. It's not necessary to change, but survival is not mandatory. And we say it a little bit, tongue in cheek. The fact of the matter is, we all right now are living in a very dynamic, changing healthcare environment. Funding is being cut for some things. There's always changes around policy and legislation all the time. It is not an option to not change. It's simply, when you look back at what even healthcare looks like pre-COVID to now, it's a different sort of ball game. And even when you think about what the next 4 to 5 years are going to look like, we can, I think, very much expect change. So it's something that once you lean all the way into and know, okay, we are going to have change, it is something that to sort of stay with the times we're going to have to do. Here are a couple of reasons why, that Dan and I are going to go through why it's really helpful to have someone from the outside. So let's start with change management. Change management is a very real and legitimate framework. There are a bunch of different frameworks around change that exists, but coming with a real game plan. Here is the structure in which we're going to put this change into. It's not simply, hey guys, let's get all the details together and let's launch it on this day and let's pilot it here. There have been many organizations over time that have tried to make change, and there are a number of very validated and proven frameworks that have been successful. They're not always successful. There is challenge to making change, but you want to avoid some of the common pitfalls that you may not realize or be slightly blinded to because you think this change is so great and you think that everyone's going to get on board automatically and you think that they're going to clearly see the value, right? Switching to a different platform or software, they're clearly going to see, right? They're complaining now about how bad everything is. Once I give them something new, they're going to be thrilled. Yet, that's not necessarily the case. Even some of the most natural tendencies, it's important to think about. There's this great book, it's not listed here, but a really cool book called Influencer. And in there, they have sort of a 6-step framework to change. We've used that one as well. And, what you'll often see when you're talking about change is, how do we incentivize the change, or how do we hold people accountable to the change? How do we really recognize the early adopters who are taking this on and championing it through? How do we sort of work with the people who are the late adopters? And they say that's all good, but that's not step number 1, 2, 3, or 4. That's step number 5. Step number 1 is simply, can you talk to the person, to the people that are going to make the change, and just explain to them, what's in it for them? The classic line, how are they going to benefit? And that is one of those things where very, very often it is important to show context and explain, but on an individual level, if I can't convince the individual contributor or the frontline staff why this is going to be beneficial for them, then we need to anticipate there will be resistance, challenge, and late adoption. And so we have to come up with that and make sure that we're framing it in the right way. A couple of other things, Dan, a couple other things over here.
Yeah, so another thing that we often see and think about when we think about what's the unique value that having an external partner might bring to the table. So an objective perspective and fresh insights, right? And so I think that one is pretty clear, and often sometimes one of the more valuable pieces that somebody can bring to the table from the outside during a transformation of any variety, right? Whether it's technology or upscaling or some sort of new structure or productivity system that's being put in place. Whatever it is, the consultant doesn't have a horse in the race, right? And so they're coming in and they're saying what they truly see to be case or what they truly believe is their actual opinion, right? There's no fear of, well, I can't say that because it might upset this person, or I can't say this because that's not what my boss wants, or something along those lines. And similarly, they might bring experience from either cross industry or in the same industry, but across organizations, and just a broader depth of at-bats and exposures to different similar types of experiences. And so that's often something that we see. I'll give you a very good example. So right now, we're working with an organization that's a mid-sized company who's trying to completely change their organizational structure. So they've been successful for many, many years, and they are in the midst of trying to completely change their org structure to prepare themselves for growth and scale. And so that decision has been made, right? They are going to move to a model that they believe to be better. It's going to be better for their clients. That's going to be better for their business, et cetera. What they are looking for support on is making that change, right? How do we do this in a way that is seamless, is effective, and how do we transition from here to there, right? What we find oftentimes is then, through our conversations, we're sitting down with people and they say, oh, well, you were brought in by somebody who wants this, so clearly you're going to say whatever, like you're going to say whatever they say, and that's just simply not the case, right? Our role is not to say this is a good change or a bad change in this scenario. It's simply to provide an unbiased perspective on how do we get from A to B, right? And so whatever that is that you've engaged them for, our example is just one. You may have brought somebody in to make a choice, and you want them to weigh in on the decision in an unbiased way. Your choice may have already been made, and you're just asking for some support on how to get from here to there. Either case, if that vision is clear and that why is clear, that team can come in and provide some objective, unbiased support there, particularly since you guys talked earlier about the competing priorities and the ability to step away from day-to-day work. So being able to actually provide that unbiased perspective and horsepower and move it forward can be of particular value.
Yeah. One of the things that we have realized is, and this sort of speaks to one of the challenges you guys mentioned beforehand, which is the running of the day-to-day and making the change at the same time. And so what you'll often see is organizations start off by trying to do the project management and the entire sort of management of the change on their own. And either they've identified someone or they're just piling on to someone that already has a lot to do. Fact of the matter is, it's very hard to find someone who just has tons of time at work. I'm sure for those of you that are here, you've gotten projects or you've gotten requests when you already are full in terms of your bandwidth, and it's really hard to find the room. So two things that are very helpful by having a consultant and having a transformation expertise is having someone who is dedicated. This is what their focus is. They are going to be the ones who are always going to keep what the true north of what the change is about in front of everyone. They are going to be the ones that are always going to follow up on the requests for information that's needed, or if they're doing pilot experiments, what were the results of that? They're the ones that are going to follow up on making sure we have meeting attendance or data, that is being pulled from different reports throughout the organization to either make a decision or to sort of see the effect of a decision. So we have found that to be extremely helpful. We have found that when you give it to someone who is inside the organization, they might treat it like any other project that they're given inside the organization, and they won't realize that it needs to be pushed forward. And then just sort of a streamlined implementation, similar to what Dan said before, there's a way to do it. Someone who's doing it from the inside usually is going to just sort of do it in a logical fashion, which is not necessarily, not to go against logic, but they're sort of figuring out along the way, and they're, let's try this and let's game plan that. And there really is a model and a method and a strategy and a roadmap that are tried and true, that someone who's a transformation expert can bring to the table.
And just to piggyback off that thought, when you look outside of healthcare for a moment, look at some of the kind of the best of breed organizations out there, your Amazons of the world, this concept of single threaded leadership is one of the key things that they'll hit on. And just to piggyback off Yaakov's thought of, having somebody who's dedicated to looking at just that one problem can be significantly helpful. Additionally, enhancing employee adoption and engagement, right? So people talked about it earlier in the chat box, I believe, about communication, right? Communication, right? In any change effort, that is going to be one of your critical success factors, right? Have we communicated this effectively throughout the life cycle, right? So the messages that we're trying to convey, the input that we're trying to gather is going to look different, throughout the entire life cycle of the transformation. And so, again, I think most people will agree with that statement. Most people will point to it from a postmortem perspective and say, I've been through this rodeo and this is where communication failed. So again, having a partner, having a resource on the team to be that person that is thinking about that proactively and saying, what does the communication plan need to be look like up front in terms of creating that buy-in? What does it need to look like as the change is beginning to take shape? What does it need to look like as we're going to implement, right? And when something changes, you're going to be moving things around for someone, regardless of the change. Like I mentioned it earlier, even a good change is still oftentimes going to be challenging to people who you have changed their day-to-day, right? This is better, but it's different, right? Where I used to click here, now I click there. I used to budget this way, and now I budget that way. I used to structure my teams like this, and now I structure them like that, right? Hey, it might be better. I get the vision, but in the short run, it's different, right? You're asking me to use my left hand instead of my right hand, and it's going to take me a little while to get used to that. So that communication to really build that employee engagement and buy-in along the way can be particularly helpful. Additionally, just training, coaching, leadership support. Sometimes we focus so much on the technical side of the change that we forget, what is it that the leaders in the organization are going to need, right? They don't want to hear from an external person to coach them on how their job is going to change. They don't want to hear from an external person what this means for their career plan they already had in place, right? They want to hear that from their boss. They want to hear that from their leader. And so the really good leverage point of an external person is to say, okay, well, how can I use them? How can I use their knowledge and expertise to upskill my leaders and prepare them to pick up this ball and carry it forward in an effective manner, in a way that they feel confident and confident in leading this change.
Yeah. One of the challenges that you'll often see when you're starting a change is that you have an idea of, hey, leader could come in and say, we have a great idea. We have a sort of a vision of where we want to go. And if we do X, Y, and Z, we are going to have happier consumers, we're going to have happier staff. And they don't always connect it to actual KPIs. And so one of the things that we've tried really hard to do when we're working with organizations is making sure there are very clear and set metrics and KPIs and milestones and timelines. And how do we make sure that we're tracking those? Do we have the data? Is it clean data? How do we know that's clean data? There's so much that's involved and important to make sure that you have a very clear roadmap and the metrics alongside that roadmap to make sure that you're heading in the right direction. And then post implementation is super, super important. There is a lot of making the change. That's great. That is sort of obviously the hard part. And then another hard part is also going to be about how do we make sure people stick with the change? It is hard to break habits. It's, like Dan said, I've been using my right hand. Now you're asking me to use my left hand. Now it's been a couple of weeks since you asked me to use my left hand. No one seems to be around. I've used my left hand. I've used my right hand a couple of times. No one stopped me. I don't really see the benefit totally. I don't totally believe the benefit of using my left hand. So I'm just going to go back to my way that I was doing it before. And until someone stops me, that's what I'm going to keep doing. And that's something that if you really game plan and you build in to the program and the process is extremely helpful. It is, I was working with an organization and we were talking about a change that they wanted to adopt. This is, Dan and I had a big project a couple of years ago. They wanted to change the way that they delivered a service, not the org structure. And one of the things, it's in one of the models, that we work through with them is this idea is that everyone's always focused on the go live of the change. Everyone's focused on here's the new thing that is starting. And you have to realize that something is ending before something is starting. And that is a lot of leaders and executives and even department heads who are trying to implement something, they don't realize it's not simply about getting buy-in, but you have an employee who might have been the subject matter expert in how this platform or software works. That expertise they had and the value it brought, that's coming to an end now. Something is coming to an end, and recognizing, well, who are the people and what are the things that are coming to an end and how do we account for that? And then how do we sort of roll that into, and here's the new and here's the benefit, is very, very important. So just some stats. I'm not going to read all of these, but some of these things that I'm sure you've heard before. You know, the research shows that organizations with structured change management are 6 times more likely to meet their objectives. That is a large number. So if you just go at it and sort of try to push it through as opposed to doing it in a structured way, Gallup reports that companies with higher employee engagement during change experience, they'll experience, 23% higher productivity and less turnover. One of the things that we'll run, we did this with a company this past year, we'll sit with the leaders of a company and we'll go through a risk analysis, essentially, of who are the people who, when you make this change, do you believe you're going to risk losing? And how valuable are they? What is their potential for growth and adopting them into the change? Who are the people that you would come to terms with if they decided to leave and that's what they did? You'd have to sort of accept that. So it is really important. It is really important to be very smart about how you're rolling out the change and the risk of that change. And then finally, a Deloitte survey found the companies that effectively execute transformation, they'll see 5x higher ROI. So like we said before, change is definitely happening. Change is definitely going to be hitting you regardless if you want it or not. We need to just be intentional in the way that we're approaching the change, not just simply reactive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you look at the stats that Yaakov just rattled off there, you know, when we talk about being intentional, right, there is no silver bullet for change, right? Lots of people are going to tell you their theory, and they're all good in their own way. And what we're simply trying to propose here is that doing it in a structured way, being methodical about it, is going to increase those odds, right? There is no guarantee. There's always the unforeseen. There's always the uncontrollable, right? The thought process here, though, is how do we come at it intentionally and proactively to say, what can we do to raise our odds of success? Because we believe this to be a good change. We believe this to be a necessary change, right? May not even be something that we're choosing to change on our own, right? And we have to transform. There's been some sort of mandate, or we've merged, or we're part of a system now, right? There may be plenty of reasons why. And in each of those cases, we gotta face that down and say, okay, well, how do we increase our odds? And so a lot of times when you talk about change, people will quote, crazy numbers about the failure rate and things like that. And, and that's fine, right? We all know that. We've all seen that. And so we want to think about how do we intentionally make a choice to be better and not be a part of that statistic. All right. So let's pause here for a moment before we dive into kind of the meat of what we're gonna talk about together. I just want to take a little temperature check of the room if there's anything in particular that people have dropped into the chat or have on their mind that they want to make sure that we're talking about here, that we're meeting your guys' needs.
Yeah, and let me just jump in to say this is a great time to bring more questions to the Q&A. We're going to have a brief period here where we address some of the earliest questions. Dan and Yaakov are also going to take a little bit of time toward the end of the webinar to answer any remaining questions based on the content to close it out. But Dan, Yaakov, I see one of the first questions that was put into the chat is really a terrific one, and one that I can say I've seen as an area of concern as transformation initiatives are considered. And that is, what common pitfalls have you seen after go live, and what systems do you use to catch and correct issues early?
Yeah, that's a great, I'll start with that one, Dan, and then you can pick it
Yeah.
up. Well, so first of all, there will definitely be the challenge of a little bit of a cliff drop off after you have the go live, in that there has been this build up until the change is happening, and people are, if it's a software, if it's a platform, people might have been in training, they've been taking classes, instructor-led classes or self-led classes. If it's a policy, if it's a procedural thing, then it's something that's been spoken about. Maybe it's piloted in different areas. The number one thing would be having the leadership buy-in to the change. I would start that as number one. There are other things that we could talk through, but really, if you don't have your leadership that is invested in this change and understanding that their role is to uphold the change, they could be a feedback filter for you too, right? They could be filtering back to you the real-time impact, some of the concerns that are happening and the challenges. That's fine. There will be concerns and challenges. It's not going to go off smoothly 100% of the time. There are definitely going to be things that we have to fix. Do a little bit of a PDCA model of seeing what are the consequences of the change and then how to react to it. But you should be bringing in your leadership, making sure they feel heard, making sure their concerns, if not actually resolved, but are acknowledged to a point where they understand that it's in your head and that you realize what their challenges are going to be, and then giving them the support that they need, because ultimately they are the ones that are going to push through this change. The executives sitting in the office or at the C-level, they will not be the ones pushing the change through. They will be deciding on the change, but not actually making it happen. So investing in that frontline or middle management level is going to be the number one thing that you want to do to make sure that change is going to actually happen.
Terrific. Thank you, Yaakov.
Yeah.
We've got another great question coming from Divya, one of our fantastic membership committee members. She wants to know, when launching a new site, which workflows do you prioritize first, and how do you ensure how do you balance operational efficiency with patient care values? And this is definitely one that we get from the clinical side quite a lot. So I'll be interested to hear your approach to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it depends on what you're talking about. So when we talk about launching a new workflow, so obviously there have to be a little generic here in the moment. But I think that it depends on the case that we're looking at, right? Like, what is the change that we're looking to do, right? So are we looking to implement a new system? Are we looking to implement a new process, a new piece of technology? What exactly we're looking at. And so I think that there's a couple different ways that we can look at that, right? And so I think one of the common things that we see is people start to look for areas where you have two things where I see people kind of go first. First is they say, well, who needs it the most, right? And they'll say, okay, well, this area is struggling, therefore they should get the extra resource. They're the ones that need to pull up. Or the flip side. These are the guys that we always go to. This unit we always go to because we know that nurse manager on that unit is fantastic. We know that they have a nice team of lieutenants, and they will implement this change effectively. They won't not take it seriously, right? And so I think trying to balance those two things, right? So on the one hand, we want to help the areas that are struggling. However, I think there's a lot to be said about going where the ground is fertile. And so from a lean perspective, a PI perspective, a lot of times we think about this almost in kind of like a model line approach of going where do we see the biggest area of leverage where we can create a beachhead and show people this is what good looks like, rather than sprinkling it to the masses first if we don't feel we're ready, to use that as kind of that test case. Now, that is something some organizations do well. Then where they tend to struggle is then they say, okay, well, we're going to keep going back to that same beachhead over and over again, right? And those people get tired. They get burnt out, right? So the critical second step there is, not only am I using this as what good looks like, how am I using them as force multipliers, right? How am I then embedding people from other areas there to learn? How am I leveraging them to go out and making the space for them to go be leaders of it, not just examples of it? And so I think that's two very common points that we see here, and I hope that was somewhat helpful to that conversation.
Thank you, Dan. That was terrific. We've got another really excellent question. I don't know if you want to move on, but we have one more.
No. I was just making sure I was clicked into the slide, and I was.
well, particularly relevant to the slide that you've got on. So I think our audience will be eager to hear your response. Dr. Nicole Harris in the chat asks, can you discuss balancing the expense of a consultant in a fiscally challenged organization versus taking the effort on to make it an internal competency and saving money by doing it with your current leadership?
Yeah, that is an excellent question, right? And honestly, and we're about to dive into the meat here, is really so much of why we thought this would be a good topic, right? Because there are some healthcare organizations that are awash in money. I've never worked at too many that are just swimming in money. And so oftentimes this is why this is such a hot topic, right? Like why, like, are we going to bring a consultant? Are we not going to bring a consultant? If we bring them in, is it a good use of money? Is it not a good use of money? And so that is honestly the thread of such a big thread of why we wanted to talk about this, right? And so I think we'll dive more into it in a moment, but the one point I would definitely make sure I don't lose here is really defining well up front, what is the unique value that I am bringing this consultant in for, right? What is the gap that they are filling for us? Because so often I feel like people will say, well, we need to bring in a consultant because the guys down the street used one. Or we need to bring in a consultant because the new CEO who we just brought in said he used them somewhere else, or the COO said she used them at another place, and we need to bring them in because they're a brand name. And they are looking at them as a Staples easy button. I'm going to slap this button and this consultant's going to take care of it for me. Okay, fine, maybe. But what is that unique value that you're bringing them in for? Do they have expertise in this particular software? Do they have expertise in, as was stated, building skills, right? Because you may say, hey, you know what, we know how to do this, but we don't want the consultant to come in and do it for us because we want our people to be able to thrive afterwards and lead it. And if we fish for them, it's going to be a waste of money. And so being clear up front on that, what is that unique value proposition that we're actually trying to get out of them, I think kind of starts to answer that ROI question for you in many ways, right? So that you're crystal clear up front. That way, 6 months in, you're not like, wait a minute, why did we bring these guys around? Why are they talking about this? This isn't really helpful. This is kind of boring or repetitive. Versus, yes, this is exactly the structure we needed, or this is exactly the upskilling we needed, or this is exactly the expertise in implementations like this we needed. Whatever that it is that we were looking for in the beginning, I think being crystal clear on that definition is the first and most necessary step to determining the fiscal importance of it, or the fiscal trade-off, really. So
I just want to add something, Dan, which is I think sits right next to what you're saying is sort of committing to the change as an organization. And if you think you know what you want, but after a few months you decide, wait, that's not really what we want, and we're switching direction, and so that will just add and sort of bloat the expense for it. Similar if any of you have ever been involved in construction at all, or making sort of construction plans, they always say you want to make all your decisions first and then let the people who are doing the construction just do the work, and not making decisions in real time about every single handle and doorknob in a house or something like that. So the balance is, like Dan was saying, scope is so important. There can be scope creep, and where it just starts to expand and expand. And if you could initially keep that scope as tight as possible, that is going to be a huge deal.
all right, so we'll take this as the dive off point, Michael, if that's okay with you. So I think because I think it so nicely sets it up, right? So we've talked about the landscape, lots of different changes people are going through, a lot of common ones. We've talked about the need to change and why you have to face this internally or externally, and we've talked about some of the why behind why at this stage of the game it's not uncommon for people to be looking for an external partner to support them for a variety of reasons. That said, you've come to this point, doesn't mean that you should be bringing somebody in, right? Remember, we said we have worked on both sides of this. I have looked over RFPs. I've worked with dozens of different consultants for a variety of reasons, lean, productivity, quality, EHRs, you name it. They've been through one of the houses that we have worked at, and we've seen the good and the bad. Likewise, we've worked on the outside, right? So just because you've gotten to the point where you're considering it, as was stated earlier, oftentimes it's because of that number 3 reason. I'm trying to balance these things. It'd be great if I had somebody else, another set of hands. However, number 7 comes along and you start saying, hey, that's all well and good, but this is a resource trade-off. If we're putting money into this, we're not putting money into something else. So is this the right place to do that? And sometimes it will be, and sometimes it won't be. And so we wanted to really kind of help you guys to facilitate that conversation for your organization. So we've taken lots of different anecdotes, lots of different stories, and we tried to pull it together into as simple and practical of a approach as we can think of to help to facilitate that conversation. It's a model that we've created that we're just calling lovingly the CashmanKlein Consultant Matrix for now. And before we jump into that, I always preface all my models with this great quote from George Box: all models are wrong, but some are useful, right? And so I'm not supposing that you go ahead and use our approach and you're going to nail your answer every single time. Just like we said, change models are helpful, but they're not a silver bullet, right? So we just want to make this practical and simple to help you guys facilitate a really meaningful conversation for your organization. So the way we're going to do that is we've tried to simplify this and streamline this down into a nice clean 9-box matrix here that we're calling the CK Consultant Matrix. And it lives on, it's comprised of 2 different factors. So first is client readiness, and the second is consultant fit, right? So often when we're having this conversation, we're thinking very much about the consultant. We're saying, this is the right team for this reason, or no, run away, this is the wrong team for this reason. Having lived both worlds, yes, that's true. However, I saw a few comments in there about culture, and when we think about culture, when we think about the internal environment where we're bringing a partner in, just like a marriage, right? If you're thinking about an engagement with someone, you want to make sure that you're ready for it, right? That you are at a stage where this is the right decision to make. And so when we think about client readiness, we're going to talk about some of those factors on the internal side where we might say, maybe this isn't the best fit, and maybe this isn't the right time. And so the way that we have boiled this down, again, all models are wrong. I'm not proposing that you guys come up with a score for yourself and be measuring it down to the decimals. It's simply to facilitate a better conversation, right? And so when we think about the client readiness scale, here's a couple of questions that we think that we've learned from over the years that if you answer these ahead of time, it can really influence your decision to say, yes, we are ready for this, or no, we're not ready for this. Because oftentimes, as our little vignette here on the right shows, that people might know that it's time. They might see things changing around them, but they're just kind of hoping that it's going to take care of itself, right? You just ignore this for a while. Maybe this regulation will change. Maybe the hype of this technology will go away. Maybe the generational divide will solve itself as people, age and change in their life cycles, whatever it may be. But we want to think through a couple of very purposeful questions up front that we're facilitating with our teams. Now, this does not supersede an RFP process, right? So every organization probably has some sort of defined process that they're looking at for determining who they're going to go with. And depending on your size, that might be very robust. There may be many steps, many hurdles, many questionnaires, many key requirements that you're supposed to take into account. If you're a small organization, it may be a small team, right? It may be down to 1 or 2 decision makers that are going to make the decision. Regardless, you have a process, right? This is a conversation that we want to have before we even are getting there, right? So first, number 1, is there a clear vision of what it is that we're trying to accomplish? Now, Yaakov mentioned this before when we were thinking about layers, right? And so person at the top, or the top of this particular change, may not be the top of the organization, maybe the top of a division. They may be clear on it, right? They may have told their team about it over and over again, but would we all articulate it in the same way, right? Is our vision of what good looks like at the end of this the same for everyone? Second thing we want to think about there is, are there clear expectations of what unique role a consultant will play and why you're bringing them in? So this goes back to that question about fiscal responsibility, right? So what is it exactly that we're asking them to do, right? Are we asking them simply to chew up a bunch of information for us and give us some recommendations? Or are we saying, you know what, we've gotten recommendation decks before, that's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is some actual extra hands to horsepower this. Or no, we're looking for somebody who's definitely done this particular change multiple times, and we want to leverage their expertise and their scars so that we don't incur those same scars. But being clear up front, what is it specifically that you're asking them to come in and do? Because oftentimes, this is when I was on the internal side, I know that plenty of times you could be 3, 4, 5, 6 months down into an engagement, and you're all kind of scratching your heads and saying, well, what exactly is it that we're supposed to be getting from this that is different than if we had just done this ourselves? Have your most recent transformation efforts gone well? Right, so we talked about it before. That was a long list, and very few people were answering just one. A lot of people putting in 1, 2, 3 different things that they're working on right now, right? So this is about having an honest conversation up front with your own team, right? What was our last transformation that we tried to put in place? Did it go well? Did it not go well? What can we learn from that, right? So good example is organization that Yaakov and I had worked with before, and similar-ish to the challenge we were describing earlier about change management. And they had a division that had change structure several years prior at a micro scale. And then they were planning to roll out a very similar change across the entire organization. And so that naturally created a lot of shading on how people were perceiving this change, both good and bad. Some people only saw the outcome and they were saying, yes, this is it. This is the way to go. Look how great this is. Their numbers went from X to Y. The people that were boots on the ground, they had a very different perspective on that. Yes, with the perspective of time and looking back, they could point to the same objective measures as to why the change was good. But they were also able to point to the 18 months of difficult conversations, of turnover, of trying to convince people, of understanding where they were going to find the time, right? And so having that kind of pre-mortem, if you will, to say, well, what have we learned from our previous transformations about our organization and how we approach this, right? Just culturally, are we set up for this? Is there clear executive support? I think I saw Sean make a comment about that earlier, right? I thought the leaders supported this. It's important to remember, everybody has a boss, right? I don't care who you're working with. They could be the CEO, they could be the COO, they could be the VP of the division. Everybody's got a boss, right? And so you may walk in and be getting told a story of, yes, this leadership supports this. We're ready to go. And you get a few months in and it starts to upset a few people and they run to someone else, someone higher, they run to the board, they run to an influential person on the team, whatever it may be. So making sure up front that there is actual executive support or leadership support, as high up as decision-making gets done in whatever context you're in. That way you don't find out after the fact, because there will be a point at which someone is uncomfortable about the change. And if you game that out and say, well, what's going to happen if someone runs to this person, or a patient complains, or a vendor complains, or one of our contract partners complains, right? What's going to happen when this gets pressure tested, right? Will we continue forward? That's always a good way to kind of pressure test. Is that support real, or is it just surface level? Have you identified and secured the necessary internal resources? Right, so the external resource is helpful, but they're still external. Right, you can bring in the best consultant house in the world. Odds are they're still going to be going to your analytics team for data. And they're still going to be going to your nurse managers for interviews. They're still going to want a representative group of people for focus groups, right? It doesn't end with that resource, right? So if we think about that financial commitment, it's not just the number on the consultant, it's what other resource will need to come to bear to make this a successful transformation. Have we accounted for that in some way? And now with that kind of all-in commitment, are we sure that we're able to do that, right? Because you can, again, somebody was throwing there about Lamborghinis and Ferraris. I can go buy a Ferrari, but if I don't buy any gas, or I throw some diesel in there, maybe that's not going to be a great outcome, right? So making sure that we have accounted for both of those. And then finally, how has the culture responded to the work of consultants in the past? Do they roll their eyes? Do they throw it in the trash, or do they embrace the perspective, or do they embrace the unique value to the team? So pretty straightforward. On the second scale, we're looking at the other side, the consultant, right? So now you're looking external and saying, okay, the folks that we're looking at, is this a good match for us, or is this maybe not a good fit? So first and foremost, pretty straightforward. Is this type of transformation their core area of expertise, right? Is this something that they have done before, or is this just another service on the list that they're starting to offer because it's the fad right now? Do you have references you can speak with that you trust, right? So everybody's got a client list they can point you to, but do you have we spoken to folks who actually were there, and feeling it and seeing it and understanding what that impact was? Do you have an existing relationship with the consultant, right? So that can be definitely a helpful thing if you've already got existing partnerships. You already understand how they operate. When they shift from the sales team to the actual production team, what's that transition going to feel like? If it's a bigger shop, are they is what I sold what I'm going to get, or do they switch it up? Is price their most competitive factor, right? Price is always a factor, but is this the only reason why we're considering these people? Because they are the cheapest option, right? And so price should be a factor, but not necessarily the only factor. That could be a bit of a red flag if that's their only selling point. Do they have an established team for this work? So do they have a team already who's going to come in and they can bring to bear, or are they just going to go out and recruit a team on your dime, right? So I've worked definitely internally in organizations where it was very large transformation, and after having selected the consultant, I had friends of mine in the industry reaching out and saying, hey, I'm getting recruited by this consultant. I hear you guys have a big change coming. And they were building a team from scratch. And, obviously that was going to be something that was going to be a challenge for them getting their own resources up to speed. So that was a red flag that was missed on our part. And can they clearly articulate their value add, right? What is it specifically based upon the problem that you have and the transformation you're going through that they're going to bring to bear? So anyways, we go through those 6 questions together as a team, and you start to think about, okay, well, where are we landing on that, right? And so on one extreme, you could be over here where client readiness is high, right? We were able to answer yes to those questions, but the consultant didn't score so well. So in that scenario, we're ready for this. We probably need a better partner to supercharge our efforts, right? Like, we're ready. Maybe these aren't the right guys. The real extreme, we're not ready. We don't listen to external people. We don't have the resources. Our culture's a mess. And this is, not a good team to be working with. We should walk away from this now before we waste resources that we don't have. In the middle, let's pause and dig deeper. So those questions where we didn't answer positively, why not, right? What was it that we need to pause and think and be a little more methodical about? Down this end of the matrix, great team, great consultant, but maybe we're not ready. Maybe we have shown in the past that we've engaged with people and not executed on the recommendation, or not taken it seriously, or just waited for the seasons to change. Whatever it may be. And so this would not be a good use of our finite resources. The transformation is coming, but external might not be the way to go on this. And then finally, this is your sweet spot. We know what we're trying to do. We know why we're trying to do it. We're committed. We'll put the infrastructure in place, and we've got a great partner. We've got expertise. We like them. We have a relationship with them. They have multiple reasons why this is a good fit for them and for us and our unique problem. All right, so hopefully this is starting to make a little sense to you guys, trying to take what's often a very big, nebulous, qualitative conversation and distill it down into a couple of easy to understand factors. So let's test it out a little bit. So Yaakov, you want to talk about case study number 1 here? We'll see what this feels like when we start to have a better conversation about is this a good fit?
Sure. So I'm going to read through the case study quickly, and then we're gonna ask you what you think from the client readiness side, and then from the consultant fit side, how you would score them out of 6. So a large multi-hospital health system was preparing for full-scale transformation to become an HRO, a designation that would improve patient safety, reduce medical errors, and create a culture of continuous improvement. The system had executive leadership fully committed, and each hospital within the system had already had PI team staffed and ready to support their effort. The front runner in the vendor selection process was Dunder Mifflin Health Solutions, led by the venerable Michael Scott, a globally recognized brand primarily known for its expertise in biomedical equipment and healthcare technology. While not traditionally a leader in organizational transformation, DMHS had recently acquired a patient safety consulting firm to expand its capabilities in HROs. Transformation in HRO transformation. To secure the contract, DMHS offered a steep discount on their existing biomedical equipment contract if selected as the primary HRO consultant, making this proposal highly attractive. So a couple of important factors here, right? We see there is a multi-hospital health system. They have teams who have done this before. Leadership is committed. They have a consultant, or they have a company they've worked with in the past. This company has acquired a service that now fits with the change that they're trying to do, but that is not necessarily what they started out as. They're also throwing in a little bit of a deal on their current services that they offer the health system to sort of, sweeten the pot in getting the contract. So I guess before we continue, anyone in the chat, anyone have any comments about this? Do you think they are, from 0 to 6, how would you rate the client readiness? Let's get some numbers. And then from 0 to 6, how would you rate the consultant fit? Dan, let's go to the next part.
Yeah.
So for this one, we felt that, what's the big reveal? It's a good fit. I'm so sorry. It is the client's very ready. The consultant not as ready. Like we were saying, the client has the executive support. They have teams ready, primed and ready to go. There is a reason why you're considering this consultant is that they already have a connection and relationship with the organization. They have seen that HROs are things that hospital systems are trying to get at, and so they went out and acquired one. And they're also talking to someone to let them know that they are going to be giving a discount on their current service offers so that they could get this contract as well. So it might be that the organization's ready for it, but we would want you to look at other consultants because we're not so sure whether they are really the right in terms of the expertise. And if cost is your driving factor, that, like Dan said, it should be a factor, but not the factor.
All right, so case number 2, I'll jump into this one. So MedNova Health Systems, a mid-sized regional healthcare provider, they had a crisis. Frequent leadership turnover. They had employees that were directionless. Morale was at an all-time low. Attempts at change had failed due to a lack of unified vision. With patient care and operational efficiency declining, the board recognized the urgent need for transformation strategy, but lacked the expertise to do it internally. So MedNova engaged with Vandelay Transformations, a boutique consulting firm specializing in high-stakes organizational change for healthcare enterprises, known for their data-driven methodology and no-nonsense approach. VT had a reputation for turning around struggling institutions, but at a premium price. Leading the engagement was Art Vandelay, a seasoned transformation strategist with 2 decades of experience in healthcare consulting and who had previously worked with the COO of MedNova. So in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and in the big reveal here. So you guys think about this drum roll. And so where we would take this conversation, or where we took it when we pressure tested it, was that this is a good consultant, good team, but probably not the right time from a client readiness standpoint. So infrastructure is not in place, the vision's not in place. They've struggled with previous transformations, and so it would be our recommendation at this point to say, yeah, great team, good group to go and spend some money on. But there might be some internal things that we want to think about first before we go down that. So it's not a hard no saying, hey, we absolutely shouldn't do this. But there's enough of a reason to say we need to pump the brakes internally, and before we throw good money after bad, let's be honest with ourselves about what we're going to need to do internally to be ready to use this resource. All right, so with that, I hope that model was helpful for you guys. Again, this is about looking at it both from the internal side and the external side. And so, are we at a point at which we think that this is a good fit? And once you get through there, we said, yes, we're ready. Yes, we like this team, this group, this individual. Now we want to actually move forward, and we want to maximize our ROI from this engagement. So there's three critical things that we've seen as key ingredients, critical success factors to maximizing your ROI. So number one is establishing clear communication expectations up front. 2, knowing when to pivot or when to walk away. And then number 3, theory of constraints, which is a little bit of an oddball, a little bit of a curveball here, but we have seen this one be a hugely important success factor that is often ignored or missed up front. So we want to make sure now as healthcare leaders, now that we know that we're going to be walking into these scenarios, are we thinking about this proactively, intentionally up front?
Yeah.
So, Yaakov, you want to talk a little bit about clear communications?
This is something, starting with the end in mind. This is a question that we ask our clients all the time, and something that at least when I was internal at Sinai, and we'd have consultants coming in and we had to make decisions, it would be sort of a litmus test of, are you asking me these questions? Because if your consultant is not asking those questions, that is a problem. But if this was successful, what would it look like? What would it feel like? And what metrics would have moved, and by when? And it is really important to sort of make sure that the communication expectations to everyone are clear, and it's based on the vision. And then looking beyond the deliverables, who will do the communication? How will that happen? Is it email? Is it flyers? Is it town halls? Is it one-on-ones, et cetera? What exactly are they going to communicate about, and how often? Again, the devil's in the details here. These are things you're like, yeah, of course we'll talk about it, but the time goes much faster than you think when you're trying to implement it. Something that we haven't totally spoke about, and I don't know if we'll get to it today, but something to very much consider is that word leaks. And suddenly people who didn't necessarily know or weren't supposed to know that a change is coming already know, and you have to assume there will be some leakage. And so you have to be proactive in that messaging, and then trying your best to create safety and psychological safety, and inviting feedback up the line, as opposed to just giving feedback to how it's going down the line. You want to hear, there was a change, there was a company that we were working for, and one of the people who was at a senior level, VP level, was totally the odd man out, vehemently and vocal against a lot of the things that were going, and everyone else was on one side and he was on the other. The executive sponsor, who was a COO in this case for the change, was very frustrated by this person. And she was like, how come he just can't get with it? How come he just can't, just adopt it and push it forward? And we had said at the time, and I said to him at the time, the one that was challenging, that, it is, in order for the change to be successful, yes, it is important that you're going to be championing the change. And at the same time, his voice of challenge is an amazing voice to have, because he's giving us the information of questions and concerns that other people are definitely going to have. So make sure you're inviting that feedback and people feel comfortable to give that feedback, so you could get a head start on answering the questions that you may not even know exist.
Yeah, absolutely. And our second point here on maximizing ROI. So after we've got a nice, clear communication, there will come a time in changes where the right decision is to part ways. And so a few things that we want to think about up here on the screen. So, most obvious one, if we're starting with the end in mind, so how are we progressing towards that, right? Are we actually moving towards what we set out to do in the beginning, or for some reason are we not? And that should be definitely your first kind of red flag, that you're not meeting that defined vision, defined expectation. Misalignment with culture. Definitely seen this multiple times where consultant was best of breed. They were very direct, very frank, and it was not a culture that accepted that. And although their advice was sound, and in retrospect, 5-10 years afterwards, plenty of people said, "Wow, that advice was good. We should have listened." It just wasn't received towards the culture, and that was not going to be something that was going to be an effective relationship. Overdependence without knowledge transfer. So I think this was talked earlier about making sure that this isn't just a drop of information, but how are we also building the skills of the people that will receive it and carry it forward. Loss of stakeholder confidence. Like I said before, everybody's got a boss. Who's the true customer here? And are they getting the value they believed they would get? And then, of course, obviously, there should be a red line in the sand, any ethical concerns or conflicts that are across the line. And then quickly, the last thing we'll talk about is this is just something that's kind of we think is missed a lot in this relationship in terms of maximizing your ROI. Theory constraints. Many people probably know this from a process perspective, but from a transformation perspective, you might be scratching your head a little bit here. When we think about theory of constraints, really, it's about what's the weakest piece of your chain, right? What's the weakest link? Because your transformation will only be as strong as that weakest link, right? And so, okay, that's cool. That makes sense from a process standpoint, but from a transformation consultant perspective, what does that mean? Right. Well, where we've seen this play out multiple times is in the world of multi-hospital health systems. People are washing consultants. Maybe you brought in a new leader. Maybe you're adopting a new system that you weren't a part of. And somebody recognizes that, yes, we will need external partners. I'm going to go get you external partners. I've seen CEOs come in and say, I'm going to get you a partner for patient experience, and I'm going to get you a partner for your productivity, and I'm going to get you a partner for EHR, and you tell me the resource, we will bring it to bear for you, right? And that's great, and that executive leader thinks they're doing a good thing, and in many ways they are. It's well intended, right? They're addressing that resource gap that was talked about earlier. But at some point, all of that resource comes and hits its constraint. Right. And that constraint could be your data team, right? I've now got 15 different consultants asking me for data that would take me 3 years to actually deliver on. It could be your nurse manager who has to go have interviews with 7 different consultants. It could be, the director of your division who similarly is now going to have to be part of 8 different task force, right? What is that constraint? Where is all of this work going to meet its bottleneck? And thinking about that up front so that we are maximizing our ROI on what could be a pretty significant spend. So those 3 kind of key points: communication, knowing when to pivot, and thinking about where your constraint is going to be after that resource is applied. 3 things that we just always want to impart after you've made that decision. So we went through whether it was the right time and if this was the right person. Once we write that check, okay, great, how are we getting the biggest bang for the buck? Those are a couple of kind of critical things we would think about. So we're going to pause there. I think that's the end of our content. So we're right at 7:20 here. So we definitely want to pause and have an opportunity for people to comment or ask questions and get some dialogue at this point.
Dan, Yaakov, thank you so much. There's so much insight to be gained from this. I want to hear more from the audience, and I want more of your questions. While you're thinking of those, while you're maybe typing in the Q&A right now, I'm going to drop the link for our post-webinar survey so that we can get an understanding of how this fits with your day-to-day workflow, your day-to-day experiences, and we want to hear from you, our audience, about how we can continue to bring programming like this to you in the future. And please bring more of your questions into the Q&A. Dan, Yaakov, I've actually got a question for you myself, which I'll take the opportunity to ask. I think the CashmanKlein consultant matrix is a very interesting way to give indication of that approach that I think everyone takes on and considers as they ponder whether to bring in transformation consultants, which transformation consultants to bring in. it occurs to me that it's very much from the perspective of the senior leaders who are going to be making this election. Underlying that, and what necessarily needs to be understood to say you are at a 6 in organizational preparedness for the consultant, is knowing how your middle management is going to receive it, and knowing that your team is going to be capable of carrying it out and doing the day-to-day and meeting with the directors that are reporting up to the managing director who the senior team is meeting with. So my question underlying that consultant matrix, in that assessment, how do you come to an understanding that your team is going to be ready to go on this as you as the senior leaders are?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think that there were, all 6 of those questions I think are valuable for that interaction. But when we start with that first one, that vision, so I think really making sure that the team can articulate what it is that you're doing and why you are doing it, I think is something that, again, don't leave it to assumption, right? So we talked about the value of communication. Any sort of change or transformation, you will know that people are ready when they say, I'm done talking about it, I want to just do it, right? And so when you start to reach that point where people are like, okay, I get it, I understand why it is that we're doing this, I understand what we're trying to accomplish, and I understand what we're bringing people in for, I think that's usually a pretty good bellwether. And then also seeing how they would bring it to their own teams, right? So how would you articulate this to your team, right? So just as I have had to come to you as an executive to a middle manager and say, this is what we were doing and why we were doing it, can you similarly pressure test that with your middle managers, right? So how are you guys going to bring this to your teams? What's your message going to be? What's your why going to be, right? And so that'll also help you to kind of fine tune in a safe space to say, okay, no, that isn't quite what we were trying to do. And so you can, hearing them articulate it in their own words, that isn't like a pedantic, okay, now teach this back to me kind of approach, but more of a fruitful coaching approach to say, okay, well, how would you explain it, to your people, and what are they going to have? What concerns are they going to have? That'll reveal some of their thinking to you in hearing that conversation real time. And then similarly, they're gonna be the first ones to walk out of that room and start to talk to each other about where the constraints are going to be and where the resource gaps are going to be and where last time this happened is going to be. So similarly, make sure that is being invited up front to say, okay, great. What did we learn from X, Y, and Z transformation before, right? When we bring this partner in to help us with this, where is this going to break first? Okay, well, I just don't have the time for another committee. Great, so let's dive into that. Last time, we engaged someone for 12 months and it took us 18 months to get the data we needed. So let's have that conversation up front. Great. It's going to be your directors that are going to know that, or whatever level is down from you. They're going to be the ones that are going to know that. And so I think those are kind of some of those critical upfront conversations to juice that information proactively. Yaakov, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I'm good.
No, I got a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Fully endorsed.
Fully endorsed by Dan. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dan. We've got a couple more questions and we'll try to get to all of them. Sean asks, can you speak in general how you think the current and relatively challenging environment in healthcare may impact engagement with transformation consultancy one way or another?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there is always going to be a lot of decision making that happens in real time. It's more on the immediate versus future, I would say. There are some changes that need to happen within the next 12 months, and there are some changes that an organization looks at themselves and says, this is a change that's going to take us 3 years to do. A change or 3 to 5 years to do. A change that's going to take 3 to 5 years to do is obviously affected by current economy. It's affected by the policy, but it's something that you're going to probably end up doing regardless, and much just might be a little more challenging to do. Something that is a change that takes 12 months and is sort of like a short-term thing that you think those might be the opportunities where companies would say, you know what, I'm not so sure. We're going to take someone from the outside if we think it's a short change, and we could try to save something over there. I do think that we are at a step right now, in particular, where there's so much unknown happening over the next 3 to 6 months that I wouldn't be surprised if organizations hit the brakes on a couple of things just for some of the landscape to settle before making some more decisions, maybe late Q3, early Q4, on what they want the next 12 months to look like.
Thank you, Yaakov.
Sure.
Couple more questions coming up, and we're going to do our best to get to all of them. Tirth asks, how do you balance, and Dan, Yaakov, you spoke to this a little bit earlier, but it's an interesting perspective on the question. How do you balance the urgency of short-term capacity bottlenecks with the need for long-term transformational partnership? And I think this definitely speaks to what you were mentioning. You have the big steering committee, and then there's the people who need to drive it at the base, and how many subcommittees can you bring them on to? So how does that balance go once the organization is chosen to engage?
I think I could start here, Dan, and then you could take it. I think, first of all, from an executive standpoint, meaning this question could go both ways. It could be a question for the executive, or it could be a question for the person who has to be at the committee meeting. How am I going to balance it as the person who might be at the committee, or how do I, as the executive, how do I balance that? Being very understanding in people are not endless is going to be a very important point. And priority is what's going to be most important. As a leader in an organization, part of your job is understanding what is the priority and what you have to communicate as priority for your team. Very often, what we have found, and this is in terms of change or otherwise, when we're doing leadership development, executive coaching, or organizational culture, is if you have a leader and they're giving down requests to people on their team, they tell their team 10 things to do. Someone on the team might treat all 10 equally and say, oh, these all have the same level of urgency, or the same timelines, or the same, push and the push and the effort that I need to push it through. And part of being a good leader is understanding that that's not possible. And you can have all these things running at the same time, but not all running at 100% at the same time, because you're going to either burn your people out or something's going to drop. So priority is where we'll work with the leadership to sort of move this. Here are the 10 things that you're giving to your team to do. Here are the things that have to happen on the day-to-day. Here are the things that are other ancillary projects that are related. Let's prioritize what needs to happen all the time. Let's prioritize where I could put you, where your bandwidth is, what can be taken off your plate, maybe delegated to someone else, so that you could really sink your teeth into this one.
Yeah, no, I think that's all good. The only point I would just add is just, again, an honest dialogue about it up front, and being clear on symptom versus cause, right? So are we worried about this constraint because this is a truly finite constraint, or do we have a little bit of kind of cultural or organizational FOMO going on, where a handful of people, even when given the opportunity to step back, are still injecting themselves into something because I need to hear it, and it's got to be me and it can't be that person. And at some point, we all weren't the leader, right? And you didn't go from Monday to Tuesday and all of a sudden you were bestowed with knowledge, right? And so there is a certain intentionality to saying change will happen, just like we said all the way back in the beginning. Therefore, how am I shoring up that supply line proactively so that I'm not reliant on a handful of people, and building that resiliency into the organization proactively, because the change is coming. It just is.
We have a couple more questions, and I wish we could get through all of them, but I do see we're coming up on time. I do want to invite our audience, of course, if there was anything in this webinar that was of interest to you, if you'd like to learn more about what our partners at CashmanKlein do, please visit them at CashmanKlein.com. Dan, Yaakov, I want to thank you both so much for this terrific webinar, for this terrific topic of great interest, certainly to me, and I think to quite a lot of our audience. I want to thank our membership committee, our IT committee, our comms committee, for doing everything that's needed to get this kind of programming to our membership. Thank you to all of you. I want to remind our audience to please log in to achg.org, go to My Education, and log the 1.5 education credits that you're eligible for having attended this webinar. And of course, thank you to our audience for spending your evening with us, for joining us for this discussion.
Thank you,
Yaakov,
everyone. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you
Thank you
guys.
so
Thanks for letting
much.
us join.
Thank you,
Feel free to
Michael,
forward-
inviting
Feel
us.
free to forward any of those questions to us if you have them.
Yeah.
Perfect. So to our audience, please feel free to send any additional questions you may have to the email address on your screen right now.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.